I'm Rachel Taylor. I'm a Parker DLO Piper, and I work in corporate and financial services. So I work a lot with supervisors, and I'm really looking forward to facilitating this panel discussion. Before I get into the format for this afternoon session, I'll ask Amy, Emma, and Michael to introduce themselves.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Amy Cavanaugh. I'm the Head of Transformation in the Corporate Trustee Services team at Public Trust. So I support our supervision and custodian team with the systems and processes and our wonderful people who support our clients. I help look at what strategic initiatives we can be working on and then delivering and how we can support good quality service in our corporate trustee services business.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Emma. I'm a Senior Relationship Manager at Guardian Trust, and my experience I bring to Guardian Trust is from fund services previously. I've worked in a lot of client services roles and think that having that frontline view of what's important to the clients is a really good feedback loop to bring into supervision and understanding quite intimately what good supervision looks like and what good outcomes look like for clients. And yes, pass to Michael.
Thank you. I'm Michael Coote. I work as a client manager at Trustees Executors, so the third person from a supervisory company here today to talk.
Thanks. Transformation is constant, with regulatory obligations and expectations, tech developments and threats being just examples. The panellists will focus on the role of supervisors in connection with Ms. managers, but the session will be relevant to other supervisory roles. Now, I didn't get the brief on the 80s music, and I've been thinking about how I could bring Rick Astley into this. Potentially Never Gonna Give You Up. The format for today's session will start with each of our panellists looking at a chosen topic that they believe will continue to have future relevance, and then some more general questions, and we will obviously also open it up to questions from the floor. So I'm going to start with Amy, who is looking at technology and AI. Firstly, how can supervisors help managers navigate the risks and opportunities of AI adoption, supporting managers to innovate with AI responsibly without it becoming a compliance burden?
Thanks, Rachel. KiwiSaver and Ms. managers in New Zealand have got a history of successful innovation. We can look at portfolio diversification, new fund structures, customer service platforms, advice models. AI and the current wave of technology innovation that we're seeing is just the next chapter in that long history that we have. And I think that the value that the supervisors can provide in that space is working alongside those managers in assessing the risks and the governance protocols that can sit alongside not only the AI technology but any other work that the managers are doing out there. The FMA guidance on AI has been really clear. It's about expecting managers to be able to explain how their AI systems work, how they're being tested, who's being accountable, and how they're being monitored. So the supervisor's role can be working with managers to ensure that they have the capability to explain that, and we can have some early engagement and communication to support those conversations. We can also look to the Financial Markets Conduct Act, which effectively has managers to avoid misleading outcomes and ensuring that the investors are well informed. If we can look at recent examples of AI innovation with a chatbot, if the information that's being provided through that chatbot leads to misinformation or disadvantaged investors, that's not only an operational hiccup, but it's also a potential compliance breach. So as technology comes into play and as we think about innovation and ways of working, the supervisors can be there to support those conversations and look at how we are embedding governance and the controls that are in place to support the innovation that our managers are out there looking at doing.
Next, this next question flows on from the previous session. Cyber attacks can disrupt not only firms but investor confidence in the system. How do supervisors see their role in supporting managers to demonstrate cyber resilience?
Yeah, this is great, and hopefully we'll come fresh from that topic in the main plenary. cyber risk these days is more than just a technology issue. It really is a trust issue. I think in the event that there is a cyber breach, it can undermine trust and confidence in the whole system, regardless of which player in the market is the one that's experiencing that event. If we look at the FMCA and the requirements there for managers, it talks about effective processes. And then we can also look at the FMA's guidance on cyber resilience. And it talks to a lot of the similar themes there. It's about understanding the preparedness. It's not a matter of if an event like this could occur, but when it happens, how prepared are you to respond? What mechanisms are in place in a BCP that talk about communicating early? What response support can you get from your cyber insurance providers? And how can investor confidence be maintained and potentially have to be won back after an event such as that? I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and kind of say that cyber resilience and cyber risk is not too dissimilar to other risks that managers are talking about at the moment, particularly something like liquidity risk. It's really about being prepared and having some scenario analysis in place to look at who in the business needs to know about these scenarios and to be prepared for it, and what controls are in place to manage it, and who's aware of it. It shouldn't just be your compliance and your legal teams in one corner of your office, but it should be everyone across the business should have some level of engagement, especially because conversations about responding to cyber happen at the management and at the board level as well. So the role of the supervisor in all of that is having those conversations early. Supervisors should be out asking what cyber response looks like, not just tick box exercise, what technology you're thinking about, how your technology responds, how your communication plans are in place, but really looking to demonstrate how it's maintained, how often is it reviewed, who's in the room thinking about it, who else is there supporting you. And then as a supervisor, we have windows into many businesses, and so we can take that information and we can share it with other industry participants, as the regulators or other market service providers, and that's a really important role that as a supervisor we can play.
How do we strike the right balance between innovation and investor protection when technology introduces both opportunity and new types of risk?
I love thinking about these types of innovations, and we shouldn't be afraid of talking about the risks that come with it. I think what's really important in the role that a supervisor can play is ensuring that the innovation, which is happening at pace today, but that the innovation doesn't outpace the controls that we have in place to ensure that we're keeping ourselves and our investors safe. At the heart of it, the supervisor's role is to protect the interests of investors, and so it's important that the supervisor is part of conversations. If you've got a manager out there that's looking at, chatbots as one example, there's other places that AI can be supporting internal ways of working as well as external interactions with the investors. Having the supervisor in the room and having part of those conversations allows us to ask questions. We can also provide insights based on what we're seeing across the industry. And I think it's really important that everyone who's having these conversations is open to the reality that technology will continue to introduce more risks. The more that we're using AI, the more that we're starting to understand the risks of bias in the algorithms. There's privacy and security of the data that's going through those tools. There's a lot of different things to consider, and not all of those risks are apparent all at once. So again, having the supervisor in the room allows us to know what's happening across the industry, how different organisations are using it, what they're thinking about, but also we can have conversations with the regulator. So they've released their guidance on AI, similarly guidance on cyber resilience. We can be part of those conversations and asking questions and sharing our insights as we go, because we want to encourage innovation. Innovation is great. It will lead to really good outcomes for our investors and members and people in society. And so I think it's about thinking about the value that we can add by being part of the conversation rather than being a handbrake, and supporting the guide rails that should be put in place.
Thanks, Amy. Michael, your topic is liquidity risk management. Why has this topic lately become so important for a regulatory consideration for New Zealand's financial markets?
Thank you, Rachel. Liquidity risk management has become very important in managed funds, and this is due to overseas influences. It's not just a local phenomenon. So it's primarily being driven internationally by the Financial Stability Board, or FSB, and also by IOSCO, which is the International Organisation of Securities Commissions. FMA is a member of IOSCO. And so what we've had is that FSB in December 2023 published its final report on liquidity risk management for managed funds. And then in May this year, IOSCO published two final reports. One of them, its report on its recommendations for liquidity risk management, and the other on implementation. So they're really the final words that have come out. And so there's a need for regulators to respond to that. So in terms of what you're doing with liquidity risk management, mostly it's to do with people who are invested in your products, managed funds, wanting to take their money out and finding that either they can't get it out, or they get it out on unfavourable terms, or they're left behind, other people get more favourable terms. So it's really about sequencing of withdrawals and withdrawals in volume. But also IOSCO's brought in other considerations as well, structural ones for the way the fund is invested. It might be derivatives, there might be margin calls, there might be collateral calls, you might have repo arrangements, you might have borrowing. You've got all these things going on where there might be other cash claims on a fund apart from a large withdrawal request or volume of withdrawal requests. So the idea is, how do you protect investors in funds? How do you make sure that people don't get first mover advantage so that they get out ahead of everybody else? They front run the fund and they leave other people behind in a disadvantaged situation. For example, bearing the transaction costs of the departure of the people who've withdrawn, or alternatively triggering the likes of fire sales of assets in order to meet demand to take the money out. So it's that range of problems, and more broadly financial stability. Because if you had enough managed funds fire selling assets, you could be looking at instability in markets, and you could have a self-feeding phenomenon of falling prices. So it's this sort of thing that liquidity risk management is focused on, and that is why you'd have organisations of the significance of the FSB and IOSCO putting years of work into this. They've repeatedly put out reports, repeatedly consulted, and now finally we've got the last word. And so I don't think it was an accident when the financial conduct report came out that on page 22 there is a reference to liquidity risk management, and that FMA will be working with supervisors to see how they're going with reviewing the liquidity risk management practices of their managed investment scheme clients, and also statements to the effect that managed investment scheme managers should have liquidity risk management programs in place that should be of a degree of sophistication that you would expect, given the fact there have been two guidances issued, one in April 2020 and an update in April 2024. This is none of it news, in a sense, to the industry. And so there's an expectation that gap analysis at least will have been done on managed funds. And in this case, gap analysis is actually feature 11.1 of the Liquidity Risk Management Guide that was published in April 2024. So essentially what they're saying is that they think within the span of time between June 2025 and June 2026, managers will have significantly advanced their positions with liquidity risk management, and supervisors will be on the same journey, and they will understand the situation their clients are in. The thing driving this overall is that for at least 2026, IOSCO and the FSB are going to conduct what they call a stock take of all the jurisdictions that they have some sort of interest in, to see how much of liquidity risk management has been implemented. New Zealand will be one of those jurisdictions. So no doubt there'll be some sort of report coming back to us about how we're going as a country vis-a-vis others. So as I say, it's internationally driven. It's not just a local phenomenon, and New Zealand has got to keep up with what the other countries will be doing, and what the expectations are set out crystal clear by the FSB and IOSCO. So if you want to expand the meaning of the words on page 22 of the financial conduct report, just read the 100 odd pages that IOSCO published in May of this year.
Thanks, Michael. What do you see the role of supervisors being in relation to liquidity risk management? Particularly, I'm thinking of investment into alternative assets such as private equity.
Yes, I think one thing we'll be seeing more of is that we'll be getting more atypical assets going into funds. And of course, this is going to have liquidity risk management implications depending on what sorts of assets you put in. So you'll have with your alternative assets the likes of hedge funds, the likes of real estate investment trusts. You'll have private equity in the true nature of private equity, which is startup capital. The New Zealand government wants to encourage what they call private equity, which is unlisted New Zealand companies. And you'll get other strange things like cryptocurrencies, which I still haven't really made up my mind about. If I was confronted as a supervisor by somebody who says, I want to do a crypto fund, how do you feel about that? But you'll have those sorts of things going into products that we have in New Zealand in increasing volumes. And one of the areas the supervisor is going to have to look at very carefully about that would be liquidity risk management. Will they have an impact on managing the liquidity risk of the product? What is this going to mean for the investors in the fund? Will investors in the fund really understand what those assets are? Have they been disclosed to adequately about what they are and what they'll do? Because really the only reason for putting in atypical assets into funds is to pursue the search for yield. You do it because you want a better diversified product and that you want more alpha and you'll attract more money from the public. So how are you going to explain that? And once you've done it, how are you going to manage it? This will be a key area of concern for a supervisor to be satisfied with.
Thanks, Michael. I'll turn now to Emma, and your chosen topic was disclosure. And following on from what Michael was talking about, how can we ensure that disclosure regimes evolve fast enough to keep pace with emerging risks and support innovation?
Yeah, so I think that I get to kind of tie the thread across all the different themes that we're discussing here. And really what all of these aspects come down to is good disclosure. And what that means for me is no surprises, and are people getting what they expect when they sign up to it and when they're in it. And I think that's really difficult to to understand when we're in the industry and you're very familiar with the product itself, the familiarity bias, the optimism bias that we often end up having with our own products and realm of familiarity means that it's very difficult to see where your gaps might be, where the limitations or the interpretation rather of your documentation, your disclosures, and how they should actually operate in practice, how they're landing with clients. So I think that ultimately how we can ensure disclosure regimes are evolving fast enough is information being given at the right time, at the right level of detail, and the feedback loop that we should be looking at for whether or not our disclosure is effective is, are we getting complaints? Are we seeing common themes across, industry, or are there particular areas that should be addressed that aren't currently or that could be better addressed to evolve to the way that people interpret information? An example of this could be the product disclosure statement. I would say that there's probably no one in this room outside of the work that we work in that hasn't looked at a PDS unless it was on a 12-inch screen. And I think that, it could be an opportunity to say, well, yes, the information for an investor who wants to read that level of detail is available in a product disclosure statement, for example, but should we actually be presenting more information relevant to what people would expect within application forms and give them more signalling for what they can expect when they're investing in a product? So whether it's a liquidity feature, so if it's a growth fund that has private assets in particular, let's say, should we be considering whether that should be highlighted in an application form rather than actually expecting an investor to go hunting for the information that they expect, or that should be presented to them at an earlier point in time? I think that if we take the likes of, ESG and ethical investing and things like that, that's another example of how, from a supervisor perspective, we're agnostic, and if a manager chooses to implement a sustainable policy or additional exclusions, that's perfectly within their realm to do so. And our view is to make sure that whatever they are doing, whatever managers are doing, is accurately labelled, is accurately disclosed, so that there is no surprises from an investor perspective when they come to find, actually, my money's invested this way, or I can't take out my funds when I want it to, perhaps my data was being used in a way that I wasn't aware of. So I think the outcome of a good disclosure regime should be no surprises.
And we often talk about the fact that some of that information isn't in the PDS anyway, it's in the other material information, which we often question the extent to which investors actually look at that.
It's really challenging. I think material is a matter of interpretation, right? And so when we're thinking of what's material to one person, it's a very subjective matter. So ethical investing, what's important to one person is different to another, and just labeling a policy as a ethical investing policy is therefore going to be a matter of interpretation. And the way that people use a financial services product, whether it's KiwiSaver, whether it's a managed fund, everyone is different, and they come into a product with their own, biases, with their own experience that means different things. And so, what's material to one person may not be to another. So how we can work to identify the kind of emerging trends and risks, or where there might be gaps in disclosure from complaints, from fiscal rulings and things like that, where it might be, okay, well, disclosure was, even though there was all the information available on the website and disclosure register and all these different places, if a person still didn't know and they were still surprised, and they've had a bad outcome as a result of that, I think that there's a certain level of responsibility that as an industry we should be looking to uplift.
And you touched on ethical investment. How are supervisors determining the appropriateness of what constitutes ethical investing when ethical is subjective?
Yeah, I think that speaks to my earlier point around us being agnostic. I think as long as we are ensuring that what managers are saying they are doing, and to the extent that it's also future-proofed too, I suppose. It's not saying that you have to be so rigid that you actually pigeonhole yourself into a SIPO breach or into misleading disclosure. I think it is all around painting the overall picture for what your policy is that you're selling. An investor can choose not to subscribe to it if they don't want to. So, but if you are saying something, you should be able to demonstrate it and substantiate it.
Thanks for that. I think at this point we might move on to some general questions, and I'm going to start with one that all or any of you may want to comment on. New Zealand is the only jurisdiction which has the licensed supervisor regime. Really wanting to know what do you think are the advantages of this unique regime moving into the future? And conversely, what would be the disadvantages were the regime to be abolished?
I'll have a first crack and then I'll pass it over. So I think it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone in this room that the role of the supervisor, I think, is the average KiwiSaver member wouldn't even know who we are and that we exist. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I think when the presence of a supervisor becomes known, it's because something's gone wrong. And so I think the value that we can play as supervisors in our unique regime is the position that we hold between the managers and the regulator, and how close we can be to the details of the operations and how the managers are working and the decisions that they're making. We're still independent, so we can still provide advice and support in understanding the risks and assessing those, and then work alongside conversations with the regulator. We're also in a position where, as I said before, we can see into many different organisations and we can take those insights and we can advocate for the industry. We can participate in conversations with the regulator using all of those insights while keeping those investor interests at the heart of what we do. And I think the uniqueness of that regime is something that we should hold on to. I think the advantage that we can have in providing confidence for investors. I think we also help maintain integrity in the market because of the role that we play. I think the other part of New Zealand that's unique is the closeness that we have to the regulator. Not a lot of markets around the world would have the open door, pick up the phone to the regulator relationships that many of us are able to have, and I don't think we should lose that. And I think that the support that we're able to provide managers in early conversations, robust and informed decision making is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I second what you're saying, and I think that no other scenario is it more present that many average New Zealanders don't entirely understand the supervisor role or what a supervisor does within the system to kind of facilitate trust than when I try and explain what we do, particularly to my parents, who are farmers down in Gisborne, and they so. Humour me for a second. My dad is he has a hobby of restoring World War II aircraft engines, and I thought for the longest time that he was special to look through these World War II aircraft engine manuals from start to finish to understand how everything operates. And then I thought I could never do anything like that. I certainly couldn't do farming like he does. And then I get into financial services and start reading product disclosure statements and OMIs and SIPOs, and all of a sudden I realised that the apple might be on the tree. So, but it actually kind of made me think of an analogy, which is around how I suppose what we're doing is facilitating the trust that you have in flying, right? None of us probably, maybe discrediting people in the audience here, but we may not know how to fly a plane or be a flight attendant or anything like that, but you trust that you're going to get from A to B. It's not to say that there's not going to be turbulence along the way. It's not to say that you might end up in Hamilton instead of Auckland by accident. But I think that there's a general trust in place that if things go wrong, that the people who are looking after you know what to do, that they have procedures in place to land a plane in an emergency setting, to deploy a life raft if they want to. They have tools available to do that. And I think one of the good things that now happens as well is around the expectation setting as well. So if you get on a plane, they'll often say, the weather's XYZ and wherever you're going, and we're going to get a few bumps along the way. So you kind of know what the journey is that you're going to be expecting. I think, as Amy's saying, our role is kind of that invisible trust that's played to know that we don't know how the plane's built, who the pilot is, who's looking after us, where it's come from, what the plane's made of, but you kind of trust that you're going to be broadly safe. And yeah, I think our role in the whole kind of in the system is unique. We're uniquely placed in New Zealand in the supervisor role to be able to influence good outcomes and encourage operational excellence across the industry, because we have the benefit of seeing where things may go wrong or where there's near misses, and there may be an opportunity to do things better, and where appropriate share that for the benefit of everyone, creating a safer journey for people to maintain that trust. We operate in a system, and I think we all have a duty to kind of uphold the confidence in the system as a whole.
I like the World War II airplane analogy.
He has a video on YouTube that is doing surprisingly well. But
Michael, did you have anything to
Well, quite a lot's been said already, but I think what we have is an intermediated model, and I think that it's good for that reason. I think if you take out the supervisor and you look at in jurisdictions abroad, you have the regulator directly interfacing with the securities issuer, and that can make things fairly confrontational and legalistic. And I think there's a benefit in having more flexibility, and you can talk to the supervisor without necessarily talking to the regulator. I know we're described as frontline regulators, but we're not regulators, so we don't do the nasty bits when they have to happen. But I think that's of benefit, and it works, because if you didn't have that, you'll have the models you've got abroad where the regulator is much more like a policeman, and it's more to do with finding fault. So I think that's one point. And another point I'd say is, who do we work for? And that's something I encountered with a couple of friends of mine who are asset managers, fund managers, and I rashly said to them, both of them in separate situations, that supervisors can add value, and I was snorted at and told, no, you guys are just a cost. And so, a cost. I thought, to whom? And so, of course, the manager may think, you're a cost to us, you're in our cost structure, we're paying you. But in actual fact, it's a pass-through. It's the investors who are paying us. We work for the investors. And I think that's a great strength of what we do as supervisors, and we should never lose sight of that.
And I know from our perspective as lawyers, we like the fact that you're an intermediary between the managers and FMA, and you give consistency because you see everything across different clients, different managers.
I think we have a level of detail that we see that wouldn't necessarily reach the, going back to the materiality threshold. There's a level of detail and a certain level of observations that we get to see at our level that can probably sooner identify where there are emerging risks and potential for harm to investors, and can be, discreetly investigated and kind of queried, and that curiosity can be followed to see whether there is something that should reach the threshold of actually, more broader, regulatory attention or action by industry. So I think we're very uniquely positioned to prevent harm or potential for harm in that way too.
And we've got a question from the floor, which is, what is the general view on licensing registry? I don't know if the person asking the question wants to add more context.
If only we had a person from FMA here, I don't think we would be best people to perhaps answer that one.
Yes.
I'll build on that though. I think we should all be aware that the FMA is talking about licensing of custody, which is alongside registry and fund administration. I think we could probably step up and talk more broadly how the industry is regulated and what role there may be for regulation where it doesn't exist today. And there is a gap in regulation of custody. A lot of people have talked about there's market concentration in some of the other administration roles in the industry. And so I think, again, as supervisor, we have a unique position where we're able to take all the insights and information that we have from the conversations that we have with managers and other market participants, with the lawyers, and we can feed that information through the appropriate forums. All of us are members of the Corporate Trustees Association. We're here today as members of the Financial Services Council. I think there is opportunity for us to think more broadly about regulation in the industry, and it's great that supervisors have a seat at the table when it comes to those conversations.
Please do send through other questions. They should just, please send them through. Okay, moving on to some other questions. There's often a strong focus in organisations about making processes and client experiences seamless, easier and faster, but these are often not without introducing risk. How can supervisors support finding the right balance?
I can take that one first, perhaps. Yeah, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it comes back to to client expectation. I think there is definitely a drive to make transfers faster, to process payments faster, to have things faster, more seamless, but there is definitely risk associated with that. That creates vulnerabilities, and I think the general experience is that if you're to say to a customer, this is going to take X amount of time, they will be broadly comfortable most of the time with actually seeing that through, as long as you deliver on the promise that you're setting, the expectation that you're setting. And so I think that the pursuit of making everything faster, where there could be an opportunity to introduce risk or a vulnerability into the system as a whole, I think that should be cautioned, maybe, would be the word that I use. Not necessarily stopped. I don't think there should be additional burdens or obstacles added in necessarily, but I think that I think that's a really fine balance to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supervisor's role is to ensure that seamless and fast doesn't come at the expense of safe and fair. And so members are rightly wanting more, faster. We look at, our members, they're not only KiwiSaver members and investors, they also purchase products from other industries, and they are interacting with Netflix and PayPal and all sorts of other consumables. And so just because they're getting those experience from other industries doesn't mean they're going to expect that from their KiwiSaver provider or other managed investment scheme or banking or insurance or any other financial product. And so I think what we need to do as supervisors is not be the handbrake, but to look at the guide rails that exist and just asking questions and ensuring that, coming back to my point of earlier, the controls should be in place, and those controls should be able to be embedded and adapted and evolve at the same pace, if not faster, than innovation. And if we're not doing that today, then we're not going to be ready for whatever decisions are going to be coming tomorrow.
Turning to managers, what are the governance practices that supervisors want to see from managers to give comfort that investor outcomes are front of mind?
I can take that one. So I think good governance, again, I'm going to say controls again, but the conversations that are happening in the boardroom today in New Zealand are a mix of looking back at we've had 10 years of a lot of regulation, and that's not slowing down anytime. We're in a world where boards are talking about AI and other disruptive technologies, and companies in New Zealand are looking at the economic environment, and there's capital investment decisions being made. So governance in New Zealand is thinking about a lot, but that's no different to any other boardroom conversation they've had. I think the role that we can think about governance practices is the quality of the management reports that are coming up to the board, and what role supervisors may be having in either contributing to those management reports or turning up to the boardroom and being there and supporting good questions that are being asked. I think we want there to be some curiosity and understanding what quality assurance looks like and how those questions are being answered. I think the other consideration, what we're seeing in the boardroom, is a shift in who's in the boardroom and the diversity of thought that's happening there and the different perspectives. We're seeing more international presence on boardrooms in New Zealand, which I think is great, because you can have shared experience and knowledge in that space. And just like governance in the boardroom is no difference to the governance expectations of supervisors, and it's the same thing I've probably said 10 times now, it's the controls, it's the questions, it's the assurance, and it's the understanding of those risks and what are you not thinking of.
Got a question here from the floor. Do you feel that supervisors have the right public profile with the average investor, which you've touched on, or do you feel more general awareness of the role of the supervisor would increase general trust in the system?
Well, I'll take one then. I think it would be probably a good idea if people were more aware of what we did. I think you touched on already, if you're in a social situation and someone says, what do you do for a living? I'm a licensed supervisor, and I'm a corporate trustee. And I really appreciate the total lack of understanding people display, because that means I can move on to something else's subject. But I think, as I said, we are paid by the investors, and I think it'd be good if they had a bit more of an insight into what we do and why that's a benefit to them.
A PR opportunity. A question here, do all supervisors supervise in the same manner? And if not, why not?
I suppose it kind of depends on the license that we have. So we, speaking personally, we predominantly supervise the likes of MIS and KiwiSaver, Debt, the likes of that. We have a sister companies, Cavanaugh, that looks after more the retirement villages, and MIS other forestry schemes and whatnot. So there are different schemes that are under each supervisor's license.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good outcome if the supervisors were able to differentiate themselves, because that would encourage good competition in the market. And I think we're all licensed, which means we all have the same license obligations. But in the same way that all KiwiSaver and MIS managers are licensed and have the same obligations, they're all different in their own way. So I think it would be a good thing if we operated differently. And I think there are some nuances and some differences in how the supervisors approach the conversations they're having with their managers, the conversations they're having with the regulators. I can't speak specifically to how my peers supervise, but I think that there is value in us being able to differentiate ourselves in the way that we deliver our services.
I think it's a fine balance between consistency with the level that we're upholding and the way that and then differentiating in the way that we do it.
I've got a question here relating to restricted schemes. I'm not sure if any of you have anything to do with restricted schemes, but the question is there a role for supervisors to help restricted schemes even though they don't have to have a supervisor?
I mean, I think it speaks to the independence and the things that we've spoken of. That benefit extends to where it's not required. Similarly with wholesale schemes, I think there's a level of trust that builds within the broader system that we operate in that is a benefit ultimately to investors.
No more questions from the floor. I think we've probably covered most of the questions that we had here. Probably quite a big question then as a final question. If we think about being fit for the future, What does good supervision look like in 5 to 10 years?
Oh, okay, I'll start that one. Oh, such a gripping question. I was thinking, I hope I answer that one last. I've got time to think what to say. Well, 5 to 10 years is quite a way off, of course, but I think one of the interesting questions will be what is the impact of AI on supervision over that period of time? So how much supervision will become a product of AI? It may be very different altogether in 5 to 10 years' time if any of us are still employed in the industry because AI hasn't yet got rid of us. We might be sitting in this room and the questions will be answered by AI when you are talking about supervision. So I think that's one thing. I think the other one would be, in that period of time, I talked earlier about atypical assets. I think funds are going to become more complex. There are going to be many more types of products. It's going to be necessary for supervisors to have a deep understanding of what it is they're dealing with and not just to accept things at face value from the managers who are keen to sell them. So I think there's going to be a much greater skill set needed of supervisors in 5 to 10 years just because of that development and innovation in markets alone.
Yeah, so I think thinking about the, our role kind of being the facilitator of trust in this, I think what does good supervision look like? It's supporting innovation, challenging assumptions and the interpretation of your documents, and the client experience that you're having as a whole. It's early engagement, ongoing transparency with customers, with managers, with supervisors, regulators, and ultimately having confidence in the ability to take flight and land the plane.
Yeah, I think in 5 to 10 years' time, the underlying principles of the supervision model won't necessarily have changed. Will still play an important role in upholding trust and confidence and protecting the interests of investors. I think what will shift, much to the to have commented, is how we deliver that service. So I think there'll be an expectation for supervisors to be more technology literate. We'll have to have a much greater understanding of the technology that our clients use, and I think the technology that supervisors will be using will be greatly enhanced, whether that be AI or another transformation coming maybe through open finance or something else. I think there will be a lot more data driven. I think we'll have a lot richness of data that will be available to us. The speed at which and the quality of that data will help inform decisions, identifying trends. There'll be more lead metrics that we'll be able to act on. And I also think that there'll be at the people element as well, if we think who will be entering the workforce over the next 5 to 10 years' time, and hopefully all those recruits will be ready and eager to join the supervisors. But I think we have to accept the element of shifts in society. So that's our investors and the members who's joining KiwiSaver, people who are going through retirement, expecting to access that fund. There'll be the employees of the supervisors and the regulators and the influence of the people that are participating.
We've actually had another question from the floor because we've got time. It's kind of linked to what we've been talking about earlier in relation to the model in New Zealand and contrasting it with the responsible entity model in Australia. The question is, could the first Guardian collapse happen in New Zealand, and would supervisors have helped in the Australian situation? I guess that's looking at investment, that a poor investment made.
I think undoubtedly if there was a role of a supervisor in that particular situation, it would have had a different outcome. I think there's value. It demonstrates the value that the supervisors play in ensuring that the movement of the money, the decisions being made, the disclosures, all of those elements are in line with expectations. And so, yeah, I think the uniqueness of our position as a supervisor, it's easy for us to sit up here and say that wouldn't happen because of the role that we do. But I think that's, there hasn't been, touch wood, a collapse of a KiwiSaver provider since the inception. There's been a few close calls and some acquisitions that have happened, but we haven't seen a collapse in New Zealand. And I think the role of the supervisor is probably key to that. But also the regulator is also really supportive and, yeah.
I think it speaks to the fact of being alive to what's going on overseas, and even if it doesn't directly apply to the supervisor model in New Zealand, if the same thing, if there's certain dynamics, so, the supervisor is an investment manager, also the trustee is a supervisor trustee as an investment manager in the Australian scenario, even though that doesn't like for like apply to the same extent in New Zealand, I think any time there's anything like that, whether it is in Australia, whether it's in New Zealand, going through the exercise of looking at could that same thing happen here and to what extent? So even if the entire scenario couldn't happen, what elements of it are vulnerable to happening here as well, and making sure that where those vulnerabilities exist, or to the extent that they exist, that they're addressed. Because looking at the likes of near misses, overseas actions being taken, all of that is good feedback to know what expectations are for customers, what bad outcomes look like, to know how we can address those now to stop it from happening here.
I think it shows, it just underscores the value of independence. So I'll conclude now. They were really great insights into how the supervisory model is dealing with transformation and adapting to new threats and opportunities to promote confident and informed participation in our financial markets. And I'll close by saying a big thank you to Amy, Emma and Michael.
Thanks.
Thank you.